you. There's many memories we shared. I mean, I was your student at the University of Miami for almost a full decade. One of my proud moments is this little medallion I received. I was in,
for heaven's sake.
yep, I was in the
Now
first,
the volunteer service.
yep, that was in the first class, the first group of University of Miami
Is that right?
faculty that were inducted. This is November 14th, 1991. And
Well, the center now, there's something, the center now is about 31 years old. And I started it back in 89. And that's because we didn't have anything on the campus dealing with volunteer services at that time. When I first arrived in 1965 as vice president and professor of education, the campus ministry was very involved in volunteer services in the community, and they would assign students into the community to do volunteer work. And that worked out. It was really organized by Wesley Foundation. Mm-hmm. Well, when I got there, nobody wanted responsibility for the campus pastors. They reported to the Department of Religion, and the religion department really wasn't interested. So I went to the president and I said, well, I think they should report to the vice president for student affairs because that's the way it was when I was at Ohio University prior to coming, and it worked out just great. So that's the way we started out, and it's worked well ever since. But student government got involved in the volunteer services issue, and they decided they wanted to take over the responsibility for it. Well, reluctantly, the program, which was called Students of the University of Miami Move on Need, was transferred to student government. And that lasted only about 3 years. And as you know, student government comes and goes. And, yeah. And so from, I would say about 1973 to 1989, we just didn't have any volunteer services on the campus. And I just thought we certainly ought to have a program. And so that's the reason I started it. And little did I know that when I retired in 1997, well, they were going to name the center in my honor.
How beautiful. Yeah. And you know how active and engaged it is at all facets and all levels. And
it really is.
Yeah.
And I'm pleased you reminded me that you received one of the first medals.
Yeah. Yeah, as you know, back then, although it wasn't organized through your office, we did as students do a lot of community service all over Miami-Dade County, whether it was through fraternities or through our sort of academic clubs. I know that we did do that. It wasn't organized, centralized the way it is now, where you can participate and not have to be part of a group. And of course, I think the reason you guys gave me this medal, it's probably for the stuff I did outside the university too. I was running the city's youth gang task force back then, founded a drug rehab center, did all those things in the community. So the center was always not just about serving the need inside U of M, like we would do,
right.
You know, with Special Olympics would come in and our students would be on campus.
Right.
Also about developing leadership outside in the community. And I know that I'm so proud of my university because I see that. You know, I still attend the Iron Arrow meetings, so I see what the students are doing. And as you know, now I'm back on the faculty at the university. So
well, good for you.
Yeah, I'm a full-time professor now at the Department of Art and Art History, and I see professor of practice, and I see the incredible work our students are doing. And part of the reason I wanted to interview you is because we're going through some difficult times. You yourself came to the university during some very turbulent times in American history, right, in the 60s. And I want to talk to you as someone who led our university for 32 years as the vice president in charge of student affairs, so that as this new generation of students tackles difficulties that they weren't imagining, right? There's a new class coming in starting classes. I'll be teaching them on August the 17th. In all sorts of incredibly difficult circumstances. And I just wanted to share your perspectives from what it was like then, how we moved through certain issues in difficult times, and inspire them. And I want to do that in sort of two, they really aren't parallel. They are parallel conversations. I kind of want to bifurcate them a little bit. I want to talk about COVID.
Okay.
Just and I think from a volunteerism point of view, I think there's so much about looking out for the other and caring for the other, and taking, as President Frank said in one of the recent emails he sent out, what an incredible learning opportunity for the freshmen coming in now to see themselves in the context of other and of their responsibility for others, right? Yeah. So, and in so many ways, the Butler Center teaches that. And everything I am today as a leader in this community are skills that I learned at the University of Miami, whether it be through the honor societies, the fraternities, the student government. I was your speaker of the Senate, as you might remember. I was also the cartoonist for a moment. I remember meeting with you about some of my cartoons. But the point is that this university is a laboratory, not just for students to have their academic training, but it's also an incubator for human development, right? Right. At the end of the day. And so much of what you and now Dr. Whiteley did and do is about that. So I just wanted to talk briefly just about volunteerism and why that matters, and almost speaking to the 17-year-old, I was 17, there's some 18-year-olds, but a 17-year-old arriving on campus, whether physically or through a virtual platform, and beginning their university college experience in the age of COVID. What would someone like you, who has so much of the history of the University of Miami, share with them?
Well, excuse me. Let's go back to 1965. I'm 94 years old today. When I arrived, I was a young vice president of just 39 years of age. And at that time, we had just a handful of Black students on the campus. The university had a policy of really a discrimination until 1961. In January of 1961, the Board of Trustees adopted a new policy of permitting any qualified student to enroll in the university, irrespective of race, creed, or color. But prior to that time, no Negro students could enroll. So when I arrived, just 4 short years after that policy was passed, there were just a handful of Black students on the campus, and there was a lot of discrimination in the community. Oh, I remember seeing water fountains that said white people and Blacks only and that kind of thing. And
Miami was deeply entrenched as part of the South. It's become a more cosmopolitan city. Obviously, World War II, post-World War II, the GI Bill built our university with a new student population and some diversity, some old, some veterans coming in here, and after having experienced the athletic theater, now building new lives as students here, a little bit of an older population, but still, as it was coming out of its shell, Miami was still a sleepy southern town.
Oh, that's correct, and very much so. And coming from the north, from Ohio University, and having been born and raised in Illinois and growing up in the Midwest, I was a a bit shocked to find the discrimination that was taking place at the time I arrived, and being committed to working in the direction of helping Black students and female students and students of all gender. I was shocked when I would attend the University of Miami football games in the Orange Bowl, because at halftime, the fraternities would run around the ring carrying the Confederate flag, waving it, and then they would stop in the section for blacks. There was only one section that Black people could sit in, close to one of the end zones. And so they would stop there and wave their flags while the UM band played Dixie. Well, that was just terrible.
I'm so sorry to hear about that part of our, well, actually, it's important to hear about that part of our history. Yeah.
It's a fact, but yeah. President Stanford and I got together, and he put out an order to stop playing Dixie. My charge was to get rid of the Confederate flags in the fraternities on the campus. So we took a lot of heat for that. Obviously, the Song of Dixie is very spirited, and it was a tradition that had been here for many years, but that was a wake-up call for a lot of people. And then Dr. Stanford did another thing in 1968, and that was he brought the athletic director into his office and said, you don't have any Black football players on your football team. I want you to go out and recruit one. Well, Dr. Stanford, we can't do that. If we get a Black football player on our team, why, the other teams just won't play us. And Dr. Stanford said, well, that's your problem. We're going to have a Black football player. And that's the reason that Ray Bellamy came in 1968 and became the first Black player to wear a University of Miami uniform. So these steps took place. I must say that they're small steps, but they're very significant steps too, in terms of what we were saying to the student body. And then we turned our attention to recruiting Black students and Black administrators and Black faculty into the university. As a matter of fact, I hired the first Black administrator at the university in 1968, Chester Bird. And he was going to resign his position in the public schools where he came from. He was working on a doctorate. And I said, no, don't do that. I said, this is going to be a tough assignment for you. And you may decide that you want to go back into the public schools. And I don't want you to burn your ties by coming to University of Miami. And that was good advice, because 2 years later, he decided that that's what he wanted to do, to go back into the public schools. Well, he went on and became mayor of Dania, and he's now deceased. But then that was 1968. And in 1970, the first Black faculty members were hired. We had Whittington Johnson in history, and then we had a fellow in architecture. And so they became trailblazers as well, and were great additions to the faculty. And
Joseph Middlebrooks is the name you had.
Middlebrooks, yeah.
Architect,
yeah.
sure. I know this through you. You and I emailed each other. So Dr. Whittington in history and Joseph Middlebrooks.
Yeah, Joseph Middlebrooks. And Then they put a black person on the University of Miami Board of Trustees. I think that was about 1973 or long in there, and that was the president of Howard University. And Jim Cheek was his name. And he was on there for 5 years and a great help to the university in thinking through some of these issues.
Yeah.
But those were the beginning days, and
he served on our board from 71 to 76, again, according to
yes, that's
Thank
right.
you, Dr. Butler.
You got it right.
And look, that 1961 moment where the university decided to bring Benny O'Barry to our university. Sure, it's the first moment that the University of Miami admitted an African-American student, but for the University of Miami to have done that in 1961, right? 1961, we're in the middle of the civil rights movement, but nowhere near the civil rights, nowhere near 1964 or 1968, right? Like this is 8 years before then. That was, it preceded, it's before I was born and before you came to the university, but still, it was a
big step for the South.
It was a huge step for a Southern school where the students today may not understand how widespread and open and vocal and vulgar discrimination was. It's systemic now, it still exists, but and that's why I wanted to talk to you, because aside from facing COVIDs and all it brings as they enter campus, and aside from literally being the victims of a climate emergency that we are facing, and their university has incredible academics trying to figure out how to address global climate change. The scientists at Rosa Steele School, the scientists all over our university are trying to figure out how to mitigate, how to adapt, how to migrate, because that is an important issue that these students will face. But they're also seeing the Black Lives Matter movement, and they are not just seeing it, they are being it, they are part of it. And I just want to put into context, what it was like at the University of Miami, literally 50, 60 years ago.
Well, let me share a story. We could talk about Benny O'Barry, who I got to know when I wrote my first book. But let me move on to 68 first.
Yep.
And one of the things that I said to Dr. Stanford, I said, every time we'd raise tuition, we'd have another demonstration and that sort of thing. And a lot of the demonstrations were related to the war in Vietnam. And so I said, Dr. Stanford, we need to appoint a permanent committee on the Board of Trustees, Committee on Student Affairs. And the reason is that we've got all these trustees, no women, and they don't know anything about student life. And you and I are going to be job hunting before too long if we don't have some trustees or are beginning to understand what student life is like back in those 60s. So he agreed to that. And we established the Trustee Committee on Student Affairs, which is still in operation today. So I thought I would try to educate the trustees and let them get acquainted with Black students. So I arranged a meeting in the Student Union ballroom, and I had got agreement from the Black students at that time. There were probably about 10 of them to come to that meeting, and then I got the trustees there, and I made a circle. Every other seat was vacant, one for trustee, one for Black student, and so on. Well, the trustees showed up. Charles Gautier was the chairman. The Rathskeller was named in his honor later. He died early. And his brother was Bungautier, who was very well known because of the medical school. So the trustees showed up and were waiting for the black students. Black students didn't show. And I thought, what in the world is going on? So I left the meeting and I went and got on the telephone and I called Harold Long, the president of the United Black Students. I said, Harold, what in the world's going on? I said, all these trustees here are waiting for you. Oh, don't worry, Dr. Butler, we'll get there. I said, well, you get in here right away. So in 10 minutes, they came marching in and looked around and took a seat. And everybody sat down, and then Charles Gautier started talking and saying that how nice it was that we could have this meeting and people could share experiences and all that sort of thing. At which point, one of the trustees stood up, looked around the room, and said, now tell me, what is it that you colored people want anyway at this university? Well, I just about swallowed my Adam's apple. I thought, oh boy, this is going to be a bomb. At which point, one of the black students, who was a girl, stood up and said, let's cut out all this bullshit talking and get down to some real discussion. Well, the trustees they almost fell off their chairs because they had never experienced anything like this. Mm-hmm. But you know, that discussion went on for an hour and a half, and it was the beginning of a dialogue and an understanding of some of the issues that we were facing at that time and the need for black scholarships, for black curriculum, black faculty, black administrators. And so that was one of the beginnings. And I've always remembered that story because I thought surely my job was finished at that point.
No, it's probably one of the most remarkable things of your career. Do you know what became of her? What that student did?
They all went on and they graduated eventually.
You know, but that was a remarkable voice, right? To be able to challenge, as a student, they
all had that spot. As a matter of fact, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, we held a memorial service on the Union patio. Dr. Stanford, of course, along with the president of the black students, and hundreds of students and faculty and so on attended that. That then developed into a sit-in in the president's office.
I remember as an undergrad, you and I talking about these moments.
And so about a month after the memorial service, the students took over the president's outer office and refused to leave. Well, we did everything possible to ask them to leave. And so as 6 o'clock came, Dr. Stanford finally called the Coral Gables police, who were on standby. And they came to the campus in full battle gear. And they would take the black students out one at a time. One of the officers on the hands of the student, the other on the feet. And they'd carry them down from the second floor to the first floor. And I can just visually see the officers intentionally letting the students bump on the steps as they went down.
Oh my God.
And then they got them down, and out the back door and into a police car that was waiting for them. Well, they were all now in jail. They were all arrested, put in jail. And so now what do we do? Here we have most of our black students in jail. And so Dr. Stanford worked behind the scenes and talked with the judge hearing the case. And it was agreed that the judge would seal the file and put them on probation, as the university agreed to put them on final probation, because this was in the senior year for two of them, and they wanted to go to law school. And they would not be able to go to law school if they had an arrest record. So that's exactly what happened. And the two, the president and vice president graduated and went on into law school, and they graduated from law school and then into private practice in the Miami community. So those were trying times, no, without any question, but we lost a lot of great leaders at that time too. President Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. These are the ones that come to my mind immediately. Mm-hmm. And of course, the community at large, as you say, was Southern, and it took a while to get rid of the separate toilet facilities, separate fountains for the blacks to drink out of. But going back to the first black student, Benny O'Barry, he enrolled in the university in the summer of 1961. He had accumulated about 70 credits at that point by taking courses elsewhere. And so he enrolled and went on and got his degree in the School of Education. Well, I was writing my first book at that time. I was retired, and my book dealt with the history of the University of Miami's international and diversity cultures. And so I ran across his name, and so I called him, and he invited me out to his home in North Miami for a luncheon with his wife. And so the three of us had lunch in his living room, and there on the wall was his diploma framed, signed by Dean Beery and Henry King Stanford, president. And so I wrote a chapter about him for my book. And
when was this meeting? When did you do this? You retired about 23 years ago?
I retired in 1997.
So that's when, around that time is when you had the meeting with him, right?
And it was when I retired, Dr. Stanford said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I've been thinking about writing a book." And he said, "Well, why don't you write a book about the international history of the university? Because if you don't do it, nobody else will. Nobody's been around here long enough to understand it." So that got me started. And then my first book dealt with that. So I met with him, it would have been around the year 2000, something like that.
I see, yeah.
And
when was our second student? Do you have a sense of when the second student enrolled or was admitted? I'm just wondering what life was like for him, again, in 1961 at the University of Miami, when so many, I am sure, of our student body did not want him there. I just was wondering how that felt.
let me come back to that, and let me finish about Benny O'Barry, because he graduated then, went on to graduate. And when I had lunch with him, he said he had not been back to the campus for over 40 years.
Yeah.
And I said, my goodness. So when I got back to the campus, I told the Alumni Association, asked them if they'd ever heard of Benny O'Barry. Had not. I said, well, you ought to have a special meeting for him on the campus here, and his wife and family, which they did. And over 300 people showed up, and it turned out to be his 90th birthday. And he got up and he said, he was very dapper and very articulate, and he couldn't believe that there was a United Black Student organization on the campus, that we had over 1,000 Black students at that point on the campus enrolled. And he just went on and talked at great length about his experiences and his involvement in the civil rights issue. But the fact that he was 90 years old and his wife was there, his children, his grandchildren, and the Alumni Association and United Black Students presented him with a plaque of appreciation for being the first. Well, not the end of the story.
Let me give you a little pause. Had he had that 90th birthday this year with the Alumni Association, I'm a board member there. I'm actually the faculty rep, one of the 3 faculty rep to the Alumni Association. He would have been greeted by Courtney Gibson, who is our president, an African-American woman who is a grad from our business school back in '03. So that is
that's major.
How we have grown, isn't it? But go ahead with your story.
Well,
you said it doesn't end there.
Unfortunately, Benny died at the age of 93, and his wife and children called me and said, would you be willing to come to his memorial service in the Baptist church and speak? And I said, of course I would. So Jenny and I, my wife Jenny and I, we went to the Baptist church in North Miami, and it was packed. Over 400 people were there. But Jenny and I were the only white people in the church. Everybody else was Black. And when it came my turn to speak, I got up and I looked around, and so I started talking about Benny O'Barry and what he had meant to the university and so on. And the amazing thing was that I would get a line out, and then all of the people in the church would say, Amen, Amen. And I'd get another line out, and they'd clap. And it'd go back and forth like this.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And it was just beautiful. And I finished, and they gave me a real wonderful ovation. And after it was over with, his wife and family and others came up and shook my hands. And it was really a great epiphany for me, because I'd never been in a Black church before. And it was very special. And so my commitment was just strengthened to go on and do what I could with civil rights.
And do you have a sense from that living room conversation, when you brought him back to campus, what life was like for him in 1961, 62, 63 at the university? Did he share any of those stories with you? Just to get that sense of what it was like for the first,
Well, I remember one thing he said when he was, commencement in those days was usually held at Miami Beach. And this is before we had any facilities on the campus to hold a commencement. And so he's in line with his cap and gown, walking along with everybody else. He was the only Black person there. And he overheard some people behind him and said, oh, there's a black person. He must be the head of some foreign government or he wouldn't be here. You know, and this is, so 61, and I can't remember the exact date he graduated, but a couple of years later, it might have been 63 or 4.
Yeah.
So it was still a carryover, and we were still fighting the issues. And
in many ways, we're still fighting them today. I mean, the very issues that you faced in hiring faculty are issues that still haven't been resolved today. Obviously, the faculty don't look like the university does. The university doesn't look like the community does. There are all sorts of I'll call them fights. There's still all sorts of fights, all sorts of struggle, all sorts of reasons why I think you know, we're still working on this. And I know that many of my fellow faculty at the university are involved in trying to figure out how to address racial, and as your students at the Butler Center are, how to address social and racial justice at this time, and not just within the university, but across our community and beyond. And well, just having your words of wisdom as to where we started. And again, university started in 1926. It took us to 1961, right. and then some. But it's good to hear that perspective. Yeah, Dr. Butler, go ahead.
No, I'm just simply saying that, yes, we've made progress. I can remember many years when it was far worse, of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it was not good when I first arrived at the University of Miami, but it is 100 times better than it was then. And yet we still have problems of discrimination to deal with. Yeah. And that is for your generation to carry the ball forward.
In many ways, I'm so proud of this generation, the young members of our society who are enrolled in our classes, who are protesting, who are asking their government to change things. In many ways, yes, you and I met each other in the 80s. I went to Miami High Public School here. I enrolled at the University of Miami and spent 10 years there. Those 10 years were difficult times too for our community, insofar as some of the disturbances, indeed riots, race riots that we had in Miami, 1980, while I was still in high school, the McDuffie riots. These are all events that you also, as a leader at our university, witnessed and addressed in helping the community. And I think our university has a role, not just in addressing the issues within the boundaries of our campus, but beyond. And I see so many of our faculty working in tandem with community to try to address these issues at that level. And I think having role models like yourself, Dr. Butler, as one of your students, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for a life of service to helping bend that arc just a little bit in the right direction. And I know that through the years, you've done an incredible number of good things, and you've mentored and cared for us, especially the student leaders at the University of Miami, who are in closer proximity to you because of our role as students leaders. The gifts that you gave us, I hope are gifts that we can pay back, that the investment of the time that you gave us is something that we can give out and share with our community. And I just wanted to thank you. But more importantly, I wanted to inspire the students that are listening to you right now through this Zoom conversation.
But I was going to ask you if I could focus just a minute on the women issues.
Yeah, let's talk a little. There's a couple of other issues that I wanted to address.
Okay, go ahead.
Women, also the same signs that you saw. My dad and mom arrived here in their early 20s in 1962 as Cuban refugees. They both met at the basement of Jesuit Church in downtown Miami. And while they were trying to get jobs, they saw the signs, no dogs, no blacks, no Cubans. And then my dad and my mom married here and then had to go to Albany, where I was born, to get jobs as a janitor up there. So the discrimination is widespread. I don't think there's a single group in the history of this nation that has suffered more and endured more than African Americans. And that's why I didn't want to dilute our conversation about Black Lives Matter. But clearly, as a gay man, I've seen discrimination. As a Hispanic man, I've seen discrimination. So I understand. I understand that too. But it's something, it's that arc we're trying to bend, right? We're trying to figure out
Absolutely.
how to, yeah. But let's talk about women for a second, because one of those cartoons you and I may have talked about is my cartoon of Iron Arrow and a tomb stone, when they decided not to admit women on one of those many votes that they had off campus. But
well, there are two stories. One's the Iron Arrow, and the other is athletic scholarships for women.
Yeah.
The Iron Arrow story, again, it goes back to Dr. Stanford. He saw the discrimination issues with Iron Arrow because it was for men only.
Right.
And so he finally decided that the best thing to do was just to tell them that they could no longer operate on the campus until they admitted women. Well, of course, I worked closely with Dr. Stanford, and so the Iron Arrow leadership in those days had it in for both of us.
And they weren't students back then, the leadership, and now it's a student organization led by students, but back then, alums, who had been tapped were the leadership too. So it was a bit different that way.
But, and so Iron Arrow was off campus for about 7 years. They wanted to fight the issue. They tried as hard as they could to maintain the men-only rule. But in the final analysis, they finally acquiesced in, and I thought it was a touch of greatness when Dorothy Ashe Dunn
Sure.
was the first female selected into Iron Arrow, because it was her father who started Iron Arrow back in 1926. And here it is, years later, when Iron Arrow finally agreed to accept women, and the president's daughter was the first one to be initiated into Iron Arrow. To me,
I remember that. I was a junior then. I think it was the spring of '85, because I was tapped the following semester in the fall of '85, and it's before that, probably in the fall of '84, when I basically said, goodbye, Iron Arrow. You're dead to us. But somehow they came back. Which is great.
Yeah, they've come back, and the amazing thing now, you look at the leadership in Iron Arrow, and so many of the leaders are women, and how wonderful that is to see. Now, going to athletic scholarships for women, back about 1970, I went to the athletic department, talked to the athletic director, and I said, I wish you would create a program for women athletes in the same way that you have men. And he said, absolutely not. So I went out and I created a place in student affairs for women athletes, named Isabella Hutchison, the first director of women's intercollegiate athletics in 1970. And then I started getting rumblings from the student athletes, women. So I invited several other men to one of my staff meetings and asked them what progress they had been making. This was 3 years later. They said, fine, but when we represent the University of Miami, we receive no scholarship aid. The men represent the University of Miami. They get scholarships. Don't you think that's unfair? I said, yes, I do. And so I talked to Dr. Stanford, and he said, all right, I'm going to let you talk to the executive committee of the board. Well, went to that meeting, and I told them my story, and that I felt that it would be in best interest of the university to start out with 15 intercollegiate athletic scholarships for women. At which point, one of the trustees, I'll name him, Stuart Patton, who's an attorney in the community, said, why, Bill, why in the world would we want to do such a thing? I said, well, because, Mr. Patton, that's the right thing to do. But then it occurred to me. I said, you know, you told me one time that your wife was a great golfer. Yes, he smiled. I said, and you told me that she could beat any man on any golf course in South Florida. He smiled loudly. Yes, that's right. I said, well, now let's just imagine that she's coming in as a young freshman and she has these golfing skills. If she were a male, she would receive a scholarship. But the fact that she's a female, she would not. Well, that seemed to carry the day, because the trustees not only approved my 15, but they approved 10 more, made it 25 to begin with.
Incredible.
And the University of Miami became the first university in higher education to offer athletic scholarships to women. So I'm very proud of that. And I didn't know that at the time, that we were going to be first. All I was doing was dealing with an issue that was wrong from my perspective, and that we needed to do something about it. So by 1980, when enforcement was taking place, University of Miami's house was in order. We'd won 3 national scholarships in swimming and diving let's see, swimming and diving and in golf. And so in 1980, then I turned over the program to the athletic department, and everything was in compliance and onward and upwards, you know, as they say. Yeah. But those early days, they were pretty challenging, I must say, because just like with the black issues, here we had trustees on the board. Why, Bill? Why in the world would we want to do such a thing, you know? Well, it's hard for me to believe that people, so prominent people in our community, could hold those ideas and express them as such. But it was true in those days.
It's empowering to have as our mission the education of the next generation, right? Imparting upon them everything. And it's not just the knowledge we develop through our research, but the ways of thinking that emerge through our work. And I think because our mission is one that's about looking forward, right? It's about educating, it's about understanding our place in this world in the context of others, that it has a certain kind of self-assessing feedback loop that keeps us purer than maybe other institutions that don't have that as its mission, looking forward. And by having those very students in front of you every day, it keeps you honest, like that girl in 1968. I wish I knew her name, who spoke so powerfully, spoke truth to power in that room. So that I think is part of what makes this university, so wonderful. Its ability to do that. And now I think I'd love for you, Dr. Butler, to think with me for a second. These last few minutes we have in our conversation about a challenge, right? Taking the history of all that you've done, whether, you know, at all these, this whole conversation we've had, let's put it in the context of this freshman class walking in here at the university. As we are more polarized than we could ever possibly be as a nation, right? The evidence-based, truth-based, I mean, everyone sees things, you know, through the prism of their ideology,
Right.
and where we're talking at each other, not with each other. And at this moment where there's a pandemic that in this community in Miami, you and I started this conversation donning our face masks, but in this community, the pain is not even close to being over. I am part of this University of Miami project called the Miami Corona Project, where I interview community leaders, but I also document the deaths on a daily basis. Yesterday, 21 Miami-Dade County residents passed away. The total is now at 1425 as of yesterday. I haven't seen the statistics as of this morning. That doesn't account for the countless numbers who weren't identified as COVID deaths, that because of their comorbidity died without being, diagnosed as being COVID patients, especially earlier on. And now we're seeing an incredible increase of infections in prisons, and we're seeing this epicenter, the global epicenter of the pandemic, landing here at our doorstep at the same time that these students are going to be transforming themselves from kids who went to schools in their zip code to kids who, out of their own decision, decided to now be part of a broader community and no longer beholden to what mom and dad said, but now beginning to develop themselves. In that context, and with the protests, with the big election coming, with COVID-19, with all the uncertainty that this moment plus climate change brings, imagine you're at orientation and you're talking to these students and you're giving them this challenge to take this class, the class of COVID-19 / protest / climate, and learn from it, grow from it as a student into the adult, into the person, into the leader that you're going to be. How would you communicate? What would you tell these students, dear class of 2024?
Well, that's a tough question. It's hard to know just how much the 17 and 18-year-old student really is concerned about their own health and well-being, which I think they should be. And I also feel that we should not be starting our public schools at all until we're behind this virus. I just can't imagine. I understand that people have to work and they can't leave their kids home without any supervision. But it just seems to me that the whole world has turned upside down in such a short period of time. I think we have to have faith in education. And education is power, and that these young people are going to have the opportunity to change the world as they face it, as I did when I was 17. The difference is that at age 17, I enlisted in the United States Navy in World War II. So I've fought 2 wars. I fought World War II, and I've now going through the coronavirus war. There are some differences and similarities. Some of the similarities is, of course, that war is war, and that means lives are lost. But there are some differences too, and that is that in the United States during World War II, you know, we had full employment every place. Young people were going into the service, and older people were taking those jobs. People didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from because it was there. In this war, we've got, I don't know, 50 million people that are living from one food assembly to the next and not knowing where the next lunch is or dinner is going to come from. And you go out on the street today, you have to wear your mask, you have to be 6 feet apart, you have to wash your hands. Those things didn't exist during World War II. What did exist was the fear of having to lose loved ones in combat going overseas. But I always think back to President Roosevelt's comment, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And let's deal with the fear and go on and do what is called upon us to do as people who have an opportunity to shape the future. These young people, I hope, will get involved in the Butler Center. I hope they'll get involved in student government. But one of the problems today is that if everything is by Zoom technology and there's little opportunity for class on-campus interaction, to me, half of the students' education is lost, because I think that student government, Iron Arrow, United Black Students, women students, all these opportunities to get involved in leadership are so very important. Are they as important as what you find in the classroom? Well, some people would say yes, some people would say no, but I consider that to be an extremely important part of a student's education. So get involved, obey the rules, and let's make this world a better place.
So powerful to hear your perspective, Dr. Butler, as a 17-year-old. I hadn't thought of that when I asked to interview you for this Miami Corona project. But yeah, you put a uniform on. You sacrificed time from your life. You know,
well, but I was 17 and I wanted to be a part of the military to end all wars. But I couldn't go in until my parents would sign the approval documents. And they would not do that until I graduated from high school. So I graduated from high school, they signed the papers, I enlisted. And then the next thing I knew, I was in New Guinea. No, I was up in boot camp in Chicago, 8 weeks. But then I was sent to California, and then my first experience overseas was in New Guinea, which was the hellhole on earth at that point. This is back in 1944. And I was in New Guinea and then Australia and then the Philippine Liberation. So I was in the military 2 years. About 18 months of that was overseas. And when I got my discharge, why, fortunately, Uncle Sam had passed a bill called the GI Bill, which made it possible for me to go to college, and the government would pay my tuition and board and room. And fortunately, I wouldn't have gone to college if it had not been for that. So I did, and there I just got into everything and took advantage of fraternity life, took advantage of student government. I had good grades, and then I went on and got a master's degree in psychology. And because of that, why my professors recommended me for a teaching position at the University of Kansas. I'd never been to Kansas. And so
You Union, but not Kansas. I love it.
never been to Kansas. And so my wife and I got married, and I took advantage of this opportunity, and I was in the Department of Human Relations for a couple of years before my senior professor recommended that I be considered for the administration. And that's where I got into administration. And once I got involved, I couldn't turn back. I just fell in love with it, and I love working with the students and challenging them and trying to see that whatever wrongs there were in the institution, we had an opportunity to correct. One amusing thing is that you may remember Wilt Chamberlain, who was a basketball player, a black basketball player at the University of Kansas. And he couldn't play his freshman year because in those days, freshmen couldn't be on the varsity team. So the varsity team would scrimmage against the freshman team all the time, and the freshman team would beat him all the time. But I had the opportunity to buy his bed for him in the residence halls because it was a special bed. It had to be longer, and it had to be higher off the ground because of his long legs. But he made quite an impact on the University of Kansas with his basketball playing, and every place he went, he opened doors that had not been opened before.
That's a fun story there. I love the bed story too. With regard to the World War II thing, Dr. Butler, and thanks for sharing that little anecdote about where you went and what in the Pacific Theater and what you did. But the students today that need to follow the guidelines for not spreading this disease. The war is this pandemic. The enemy is the virus, and the way we kill the enemy is by not spreading it. When you went to liberate the Philippines, you weren't doing that for you. You were doing that for us. You were doing that for your world, your community, your country. You weren't doing it to protect you, to make you healthy. You would have been healthier in Illinois. You did that to protect us. And what we're asking our students to do is not to, go to battle and risk death. What we're asking our students to do, in fact, our entire community to do, is just to be reasonable, to wear a mask, to wash your hands, to social distance.
I know, and that's going to be tough, but it has to be done. Or well, look at the baseball team of the University of not the university, just the city of Miami. I think 17 have already been diagnosed with the virus, and I don't know what's going to happen. So this thing will spread very rapidly unless everyone assumes that kind of responsibility. And I know it's going to take people like you, and it's going to take people like Pat Whiteley and her staff, and the health center and the guidance center, the counseling center, everybody working in tandem to make sure that these rules are followed until we get on top of this virus.
It helps to have a president who knows a thing or two about health.
Oh, indeed it is. Indeed it is.
But I think the broader lesson, so the obvious one is, take, do the prudent thing, and any student that comes to a university has to pledge to do those things. But I think the the thing I'd like to communicate to the student body is this, is that there's an opportunity for you to see yourself not as what degree am I going to get and what job am I going to get, right? But instead, there's a lesson here in civility. There's a lesson here in compassion and empathy and care about what kind of person am I going to be and what is my role in this world. And I think that in times like this, when there's going to be a little sacrifice, where we're not going to be able to do homecoming the way we normally do homecoming, where dorm life and university life is going to be remarkably different.
Yeah.
It's going to take some sacrifice, but you know what, Dr. Butler? It's nothing compared to the sacrifice you endured for 18 months. Okay.
Well,
and what I'm saying is we need that resolve, right? We need that resolve. And it's just so inspiring to sit here and talk to you as an integral part of our university for decades, to inspire this new generation of students as we face the challenge.
Couldn't agree more. And one little thought comes to mind. I was in Australia when President Roosevelt died. I think it was April the 12th, 1945. And what a tragedy that was, because he had been such a great leader. And so I said a little prayer on his behalf, and I said a prayer on behalf of President Truman. Little did I realize that I think it was 8.5 years later, as my life progressed, that I would end up taking international students from the University of Kansas over to his office to visit with him personally. And I did that for several years until I left Kansas. He became a great friend.
Oh my God.
And
how special. Wow.
It was very special. He would stand at the door with me, this is before the Truman Library was built, but he had an office in downtown Federal Reserve Bank building. And we would stand at the door and I would introduce each student to him by name and country. I'd take 200 at a time, 2 busloads, 100 on each busload. And they would bow, they would curtsy. He would always have some key remark. For example, when President Magsaysay was killed in an airplane crash, who was president of the Philippines, he said to Virginia Marino, who was a student, "Your country has lost a great, great leader. I knew him personally, and I share the loss in your country." And he would do this with one student after the other, which was so powerful and touching to me. But goodness gracious, who would have thought when I was in Australia, Brisbane, Australia, in April of 1945, he became president, by saying a little prayer on his future leadership and him, that 8.5 years later, I would be in his office with large groups of international students.
Oh, beautiful. Truman was a Lambda Chi, as am I. The closest I've come to him was the little White House in the Keys. And now, through you, I'm even a step closer. So how beautiful, Dr. Butler. Yeah, universities have a way of doing that. When I was an undergrad, I was in the Lecture Series Committee. And I remember through that committee being able to not just meet, but pick up Nobel Peace Prize winners from their hotel and drive them to campus.
Oh, wonderful.
And just have these wonderful conversations. So yeah, universities do open the world to little 20-year-olds back then.
Education is power, but a part of that education is just what you're talking about, that extra class leadership.
Yep.
And opportunity to broaden your horizons. And that's what the Butler Center is all about, trying to provide student leadership and volunteer services. And I hope that all the students will get involved in that center.
Well, Dr. Butler, thank you for giving me the opportunity to grow. And thank you for taking a moment here with me so that I will play this entire conversation in its entirety to my ARC 315 course. In fact, I think I'm starting the course with this conversation on April the 17th. And
wish you the very best. And
I'm sorry, on August the 17th. Where am I? August the 17th in 2 weeks. But I thank you. I thank you so much for, for inspiring yet another class of University of Miami students.
And thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Butler. I love you very much, Dr. Butler. Take care.
Okay.
Go Canes.